The sleek alien craft cut through the empty void of space, its surface reflecting the distant stars in cold, metallic brilliance. Inside, a group of alien students sat in silence, each one struggling to come to terms with what they had been taught. They were about to land on Earth, a planet they had been warned about for centuries. Their instructors had drilled it into their minds: Earth was a Deathworld. A place where life was cheap, where survival was a constant struggle, and where the dominant species, humans, were a force to be reckoned with. But it wasn't just the reputation of the planet that intrigued them, it was the mystery surrounding it. Why was Earth deemed so dangerous? What made it stand out among the thousands of habitable planets across the galaxy? The craft shook slightly as it entered Earth's atmosphere, the vibrations pulsing through the hull. One of the students, a young alien named Zar, glanced nervously out the window. He could see the planet now, a swirling mass of blue oceans and green land masses. From a distance, Earth looked serene, peaceful even. But the stories told by their elders painted a different picture, one of brutal environments, vicious wildlife, and an unpredictable climate that could turn deadly in an instant. Is it true? Zar asked, his voice barely a whisper. Is Earth really a death world? His question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of fear and curiosity. The others remained silent, their eyes fixed on the approaching planet. A sense of unease spread through the group as they realized that they were about to step foot on a world that was, by all accounts, a dangerous anomaly. The craft began its descent, the alien students bracing themselves as the turbulence intensified. The pilot, a seasoned member of their race, barked instructions over the intercom, preparing the group for landing. "We're about to touch down," the pilot announced. "Remember, your mission is to observe. Learn. Do not engage unless necessary." Zar swallowed hard, gripping the edge of his seat. He had read the reports, had listened to the lectures, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. As the ground below them grew closer, his mind raced with questions. What would Earth be like? Would the humans live up to their reputation as survivors, or was there more to this planet's history than they had been told? The ship touched down with a soft thud, the landing gear absorbing the shock of their arrival. The group stood in unison, each one silently preparing for what lay ahead. Zar's heart pounded in his chest as he followed the others out of the ship and onto the strange soil of Earth. At first glance, the landscape was nothing extraordinary. Rolling hills stretched out before them, covered in lush greenery, with the distant mountains towering in the background. Birds, strange, colorful creatures, flitted through the air, their songs echoing in the calm breeze. But as Zar took a step forward, he felt it. The air, thick with humidity and foreign scents, seemed to press in on him, suffocating in its density. The sounds of nature, once peaceful, now seemed hostile, as though the very planet was aware of their presence and waiting for them to make a mistake. "Stay alert," the leader of their group, Sela, cautioned. "We don't know what to expect here. Earth is a world of extremes. One moment, it may seem peaceful. The next, it could turn deadly." Zar nodded, his senses heightened. He had been trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for the raw, untamed nature of Earth. The planet felt, alive in a way he couldn't explain, as though every blade of grass, every gust of wind, and every ripple in the water was watching them. "Let's start the survey," Sela continued, signaling for the group to move forward. "We'll split into 2 teams. Zar, you're with me. We'll investigate the nearby forest. The rest of you, explore the plains. Be cautious. Do not underestimate this world." The alien students began to move out, each one spreading out in different directions, their eyes scanning the environment for signs of danger. Zar stuck close to Sela, who moved with a practiced ease through the dense vegetation. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, the chirping of insects and the rustling of leaves creating a symphony of life that seemed almost too perfect. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Zar's anxiety grew. He had expected danger, but nothing in his training had prepared him for the strange, oppressive energy that seemed to cling to the air here. The trees were enormous, their trunks gnarled and twisted, as though they had witnessed centuries of storms and upheaval. Thick vines hung from the branches, their tendrils reaching out like the fingers of some ancient beast. Zar reached out to touch one of the vines, and it recoiled, as if alive, before curling back around the tree. A chill ran down his spine. "This place is alive," he murmured, more to himself than to Sela. Sela paused, her keen eyes scanning the surroundings. "It is. Earth has a way of surviving, no matter what. The plants, the animals, the very environment itself, it all fights to exist." Zar frowned. "Fights to exist? What do you mean?" Sela turned to him, her expression serious. "Earth is a world of constant struggle. Life here doesn't just survive, it fights, adapts, and overcomes. And it does so relentlessly." Zar glanced around, trying to make sense of her words. The forest seemed so still, so serene. But there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of something large moving through the brush. Zar froze, his heart racing. "Stay close," Sela whispered, her eyes scanning the area. "We've attracted attention." The ground beneath them trembled slightly, and then the source of the disturbance emerged from the trees. A massive creature, its body covered in thick, spiked armor, emerged from the foliage. Its eyes gleamed with an intelligence that sent a jolt of fear through Zar's body. It was a predator, and they were its prey. The creature roared, its massive jaws snapping as it charged toward them. Sela reacted instantly, pulling Zar back into the safety of a nearby tree. "Stay low," she hissed. "Let it pass. If it senses us, it'll attack." Zar's mind raced. This was what he had been trained for. He knew how to analyze threats, how to stay calm in the face of danger. But this was different. This was Earth. And Earth wasn't playing by any rules he knew. The creature lumbered past them, its massive form shaking the ground with every step. Zar held his breath, praying it wouldn't detect them. After what felt like an eternity, the creature disappeared into the underbrush. Zar let out a shaky breath, his body trembling from the adrenaline. He turned to Sela, who was watching him with a calm, almost detached expression. "That was a close call," Zar said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sela nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "This is what Earth is. It's a world that tests everything, even the strongest. But it also teaches something important." Zar frowned. "What's that?" Sela's lips curled into a slight smile. "The will to survive. Everything on this planet is driven by it. The plants, the animals, the humans, they all fight, adapt, and thrive because they have no other choice. They are survivors, in the truest sense of the word." Zar felt a knot form in his stomach. He had expected danger, but he hadn't expected to feel so small. The creature they had just encountered was a mere glimpse of the raw power Earth held. He had only seen the surface of what this world could offer. And the deeper they went, the more he realized, Earth was not just a death world, it was a world that fought for life with everything it had. Sela turned to him, her expression softening. "The question is, Zar, can we survive here?" Before he could respond, a human appeared in the distance, stumbling through the forest, bloodied and covered in dirt. Their eyes met, and the human's expression shifted from fear to confusion. Then, with a voice that shook with urgency, the human spoke just 2 words. "It's already too late." The human's words echoed in Zar's mind, "It's already too late." The sentence carried an urgency that made Zar's heart race, but before he could process what had been said, the human collapsed to the ground. His body gave way, crumpling in a heap of blood, sweat, and exhaustion. Zar moved instinctively toward the fallen figure, but Sela held him back with a firm grip on his arm. "Don't," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something more to this. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." Zar's eyes darted between the human and Sela. He could see the deep gashes across the human's face, the torn clothes, the signs of a struggle. But it was the expression of sheer terror on the man's face that stopped him in his tracks. This was no ordinary injury. The man was terrified of something Zar couldn't yet comprehend. Sela crouched down, examining the human from a safe distance. Her keen eyes scanned for any sign of danger, but her focus remained on the man's face. "Whatever he's running from, it's more dangerous than we thought." Zar's confusion grew. More dangerous than what? Earth was already unlike anything he had expected, but this new layer of mystery, this sense of imminent doom, was starting to feel like a living, breathing thing. The planet had seemed so calm at first, but the danger, the struggle, the fight for survival, it was all so much more than anyone had told them. He bent down beside the human, carefully lifting the man's limp head. The human's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and Zar's heart skipped a beat as the man's gaze locked onto his. "You don't belong here," the human rasped, his voice strained, barely audible. "No one does, not anymore." The words chilled Zar to the bone. Not anymore, what did that mean? Was Earth dying? Was that why it was called a death world? Before Zar could ask, the human's eyes closed again, and his breathing became shallow. Sela straightened up, turning away from the fallen figure. "We can't waste time. We need to keep moving." Zar hesitated. What if he knows something? What if he can tell us what's really going on? Sela shook her head. "We've been trained for this. We observe. We don't interfere unless necessary. If he survives, he might be able to provide answers. But if we stay, we risk drawing attention." Zar wanted to protest, but he knew she was right. The man's condition wasn't something they could treat, and the last thing they needed was to be discovered by whatever had driven the human to such a state. Reluctantly, he followed Sela as she led them deeper into the forest. As they walked, Zar couldn't shake the image of the man's terrified eyes from his mind. He kept asking himself what was really happening on Earth. What was so dangerous that it had driven this human to the edge? What was it that he was trying to warn them about? The forest around them grew denser as they moved forward. The air felt heavier now, charged with an invisible tension that made every sound feel amplified. Zar could hear the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of birds, but all of it seemed somehow out of place, as if it were part of a larger, unseen drama unfolding around them. "We're close," Sela murmured, her eyes scanning the horizon. "There's something here I want to show you." Zar glanced at her, but she didn't explain further. He had no choice but to follow. They came to a clearing where the trees opened up, revealing a large structure half buried in the earth. It was old, its stone walls cracked and weathered, but there was an unmistakable power to it, as though it had once been something of immense importance. "What is this place?" Zar asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sela's eyes narrowed. "I'm not sure. But we need to investigate. It's not on any of the scans, and there's no record of it in any databases. It's as if it doesn't exist." Zar frowned. "But it's here. What could have built something like this?" "I don't know," Sela replied. "But I have a theory. I think whatever is going on here, whatever is happening to this planet, it's connected to this place." They approached the structure cautiously, their senses on high alert. The ground beneath them was soft, giving way as they walked, as if the earth itself were trying to swallow the building. It felt ancient, older than any civilization Zar had ever encountered. The stone was smooth in some areas, rough in others, and there were strange carvings etched into the surface. Symbols that seemed to shift and change when he looked at them too long, like they were alive. Zar reached out to touch one of the carvings, but Sela stopped him. "Don't. These markings, there's something off about them. We don't understand their meaning." Zar withdrew his hand, a chill crawling up his spine. Something about the place felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the unease he felt in the air, it was as though the very fabric of reality itself was bending here. Sela led them around the structure to a large, broken doorway. The stone door had been shattered, its pieces scattered across the ground. Inside, the room was dark, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. Yet there was something strangely vibrant about it, as though the place had been untouched for centuries, yet still held a mysterious energy. "This is it," Sela said softly. "This is the heart of the mystery. I believe this is where the answers are hidden." Zar stepped inside, the eerie silence almost suffocating. The walls were lined with more carvings, and at the far end of the room, an altar stood. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, ancient, yet perfectly preserved, as though it had been waiting for them. "What is this place?" Zar asked again, his voice shaking with a mixture of awe and fear. Sela's expression was grave. "I think this was once a place of worship. The altar, it's where they made offerings. But to whom? And why?" Zar's gaze fell upon a strange, glowing object on the altar. It was small, but it radiated a power unlike anything he had ever felt. The light pulsed softly, almost as if it were alive, drawing him in. "Don't touch it," Sela warned, but it was too late. Zar's hand reached out almost involuntarily, drawn to the object. As soon as his fingers brushed the surface, the room seemed to tremble. The ground beneath their feet shook violently, and the walls groaned with the weight of ancient secrets. Zar yanked his hand back, his heart pounding in his chest as the light from the object flared brightly. The symbols on the walls seemed to move, twisting and shifting, and for a moment, Zar saw flashes of something, images, visions, too fast to understand. He saw humans, bloodied and broken, fighting something unseen. He saw the land cracking open, mountains rising and falling, storms ravaging the skies. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the light died down. The room returned to its previous state of eerie silence. Zar staggered back, his breath ragged. "What was that?" Sela's face was pale. "I don't know. But whatever that was, it's linked to Earth's past. And I'm starting to believe that the humans weren't the first to fight for survival here. They were the latest." Zar turned to her, his mind reeling. "You mean to say, there were others? Other species? What happened to them?" Sela's eyes darkened. "I think they failed. And now, Earth's fight has become a battle for dominance among the species. But the humans, they're different. They don't give up. And that's why Earth is known as a death world." Zar's mind buzzed with confusion as he tried to process everything that had just happened. The images that flashed before his eyes, humans, battles, destruction, survival, pounded relentlessly in his mind. And the object on the altar, the one he had touched, it had felt wrong, but also so right, as if it were part of something much larger, something connected to this world and the cosmos. Sela's voice broke through his swirling thoughts. "We need to leave this place. If whatever that was comes back." "I don't think it's gone," Zar interrupted. He was still shaking from the experience, but the words felt urgent. He could feel it in his bones. "I think it's just getting started." Sela hesitated before nodding. She could see the fear in his eyes, the weight of his realization. She had seen the effects of alien artifacts before, but nothing like this. This felt different. Something had been awakened, something that had been hidden beneath the surface of Earth for eons, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Without saying another word, Sela led them back out of the ancient structure. As they stepped into the clearing, Zar's gaze lingered on the altar. Whatever it was, it had set something in motion, something bigger than either of them could understand. And they needed answers. Fast. "We need to get to the human settlement," Sela said, her voice cold with determination. "If there's anything we can learn about this place, it's there." Zar nodded. "And what about the human we left behind?" Sela's eyes softened. "We'll check on him. But right now, we have to figure out what's really going on here. If this planet truly is a death world, then the sooner we understand why, the better." The journey to the human settlement wasn't long, but it felt like an eternity. The air was thick with tension, each step they took into the unknown felt heavier than the last. Zar couldn't shake the feeling that the earth was alive, breathing beneath their feet, and that the past, whatever had happened here, was coming back to haunt them. When they finally reached the settlement, it was eerily quiet. The usual bustle of human activity, the sounds of children playing, the hum of machinery, it was all absent. Instead, the streets were deserted, the buildings dark and empty. It was as though the people had just vanished into thin air. Zar exchanged a glance with Sela. She was scanning the area with practiced precision, her hand resting on the hilt of her weapon. It was clear that something was wrong, something had happened, and it wasn't good. "I don't like this," Zar muttered. Sela nodded in agreement. "Neither do I." They moved cautiously through the empty streets, the silence stretching between them. Every corner they turned, every building they passed, felt like an opportunity for danger to strike. Zar couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something, or someone, was waiting for them to make a mistake. Finally, they reached the center of the settlement. The heart of it. It was there that Zar first saw the human survivors, gathered in a small group in the middle of the town square. They were huddled together, speaking in hushed tones, their faces drawn and weary. Sela stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "What happened here?" she called out, her voice loud enough to carry but still measured. The group looked up at them, their expressions a mix of fear and relief. A woman stepped forward, her eyes wide with exhaustion. "You've come," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would come. We've been alone for so long." Zar's brow furrowed. "Alone? What do you mean? Where are the others?" The woman glanced around nervously, as though checking for something, or someone. She lowered her voice to a near whisper. "We thought the worst was over. The beasts stopped attacking us a few days ago. But the truth is, they've been watching us the whole time. They want us to leave. They want us to surrender the planet." Zar exchanged a look with Sela. The mention of beasts confirmed something they had suspected since the moment they landed on Earth. It wasn't just the humans that had survived here. There were other forces at play, forces that were ancient, hidden, and perhaps far more dangerous than they had initially imagined. "What are you talking about?" Sela pressed. "Who are these beasts?" The woman shook her head, her eyes filled with a haunting kind of dread. "They're not beasts. Not exactly. She paused, struggling to find the right word, "they're things that came from the ground. They're not from our world. They don't die." Zar took a step closer, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, they don't die?" "They've tried everything," the woman continued, her voice trembling. "Fire, weapons, explosives, nothing works. We thought they were just attacks, that they were trying to kill us, but we were wrong. They were testing us, testing our defenses, to see if we were worthy of surviving." Zar felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He glanced at Sela, who looked equally disturbed. "Worthy of surviving," he repeated. "What does that mean?" The woman's eyes darted around again, her voice dropping even lower. "The people who've disappeared, they didn't die. They were taken. We've learned that much. These things, they're. Who is they, exactly?" Zar interrupted. Who's doing this? Before the woman could answer, there was a sound, a sharp crack from one of the nearby buildings. Zar's reflexes kicked in immediately, and he turned toward the noise, his heart racing. Stay behind me, he ordered, pulling out his weapon. Sela was already on alert, her hand gripping her blaster. What's going on? She whispered. Before Zar could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. It was subtle at first, like the shifting of the earth beneath their feet. Then it grew stronger. The air hummed with an unnatural energy, and a low growl vibrated through the ground. Zar felt his stomach tighten as he realized something was coming. Sela didn't need any more prompting. Get to cover, she yelled. Zar grabbed the woman by the arm, pulling her toward the nearest building. As they reached the door, the sound grew louder, closer. A massive form rose from the earth in front of them, its shape towering and monstrous. Zar barely had time to react before the beast was upon them. The thing was like nothing he had ever seen before. It had an immense, muscular frame, covered in thick, armored scales. Its eyes glowed a deep red, and its claws were sharp enough to tear through metal. The air around it crackled with raw energy, and as it roared, the ground beneath it splintered. Move! Sela shouted, firing at the beast. The blast from her weapon hit the creature in the chest, but it didn't even flinch. The thing charged forward, its claws slashing through the air, narrowly missing Zar's side. He dove to the ground, rolling to safety as the beast lunged at him. Zar! Sela screamed, firing again. This time, the shot hit the creature's eye, but the beast barely reacted. It was as though nothing could stop it. Zar scrambled to his feet, pulling out a larger weapon from his pack. We can't kill it, he shouted. We need to find out what it is, what it wants. But as he turned to the woman for answers, he saw the terror in her eyes. She was shaking uncontrollably, and for a brief moment, Zar saw the truth. This thing, this creature, wasn't just a monster. It was a harbinger of something far worse, a test, a challenge set in motion long before any of them had arrived. And the worst part? They weren't just in the middle of Earth's fight for survival. They were the ones being tested. The creature's roar still echoed in Zar's ears as the beast clawed at the air, its glowing red eyes fixed on them with a maddened fury. The ground trembled beneath its every movement, sending shockwaves that rattled the buildings around them. Sela and Zar stood frozen for a moment, the sheer scale of the creature's presence almost paralyzing them. Zar quickly snapped back to reality. We need to move, now, he shouted to Sela. But before they could react, the beast lunged again, its massive claws slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Sela fired again, this time aiming for the creature's underbelly, but the blast seemed to have little effect. The thing's skin was like reinforced armor, impervious to their weapons. Zar's heart raced as he watched the creature close in on them, its massive form a blur of rage and power. We have to fall back, Sela urged, pulling Zar's arm as she sprinted toward a nearby alley. The woman they had spoken to earlier was already ahead of them, scrambling to find shelter. They dashed through the narrow alley, barely avoiding the beast's claws as it tore through the street behind them. The roar of its fury reverberated through the air, deafening in its intensity. Zar's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't fight it. Not like this. What the hell are these things? Zar gritted through clenched teeth, his mind racing for answers. And why haven't the humans been able to deal with them? Sela's face was grim as they reached a dead end in the alley. They're not just creatures, Zar. They're something more. Something older. These things are part of a much larger puzzle. And I think we just stumbled right into the middle of it. Before Zar could respond, a sudden explosion rocked the ground, sending dust and debris into the air. They turned to see a massive section of the street collapse, the earth splitting open like a wound in the planet's skin. From the crack, the beast emerged again, its grotesque form undeterred by the destruction. Zar's heart skipped a beat as he watched it approach. They had no choice now but to face it head-on. There was no more running, no more hiding. It had found them, and there would be no escape unless they figured out how to stop it. "We need to find out what they want," Sela said urgently, her voice tinged with fear but also a fierce determination. "We need to know why they're here, and why Earth has been labeled a death world." Zar nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "But how do we stop something like that? How do we fight something that doesn't even seem to feel pain?" Sela scanned their surroundings, her eyes narrowing as she thought quickly. "Maybe we don't fight it. Maybe we find the source. This creature, these creatures, they're connected to something deeper. Something that has to do with the planet itself." Zar looked at her, still unsure. "And how do you suggest we find that?" "There has to be more to this planet than just the surface," Sela said, her voice steady. "There's something under the ground. Something ancient." Before Zar could respond, the woman they had been speaking to earlier emerged from the shadows, her face pale and filled with dread. "You need to leave," she said breathlessly. "All of you need to leave. You don't know what you've uncovered. You don't understand." Zar took a step toward her, his brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? We can't leave now. We need answers." The woman shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't understand. The beasts, no, they're not just beasts. They're protectors. Guardians of something buried deep beneath the surface. They're here to keep you from finding it. From awakening what's hidden." Sela stepped forward, her expression hardening. "What's hidden? What are you talking about?" The woman's eyes flickered nervously as she glanced over her shoulder, as though fearing someone, or something, was listening. "I can't say it here. It's too dangerous. You've already triggered something. You've awakened it." "Awakened what?" Zar pressed, but the woman's expression was filled with a mixture of terror and regret. She didn't answer. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shuddered once again, and a deep, rumbling growl filled the air. The beast had found them. "We don't have time for this," Zar said, his voice low and urgent. "We have to move." Sela grabbed the woman's arm, pulling her along as they sprinted for cover, ducking into a nearby building just as the creature's claws raked across the ground where they had just stood. Zar's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the monster's enormous form circle the building, its eyes glowing with an almost otherworldly hunger. "What do you know?" Sela demanded, her voice sharp. "What is this thing you've awakened?" The woman's face crumpled in despair as she collapsed onto her knees. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't know what you've done. None of us do. We were told to stay away from the ruins. But curiosity, it's always led us here. We never thought it would wake up." Zar's frustration flared. "Wake up what? What is it?" But the woman couldn't speak. Instead, she pointed toward the ground beneath them, her eyes wide with fear. Zar and Sela exchanged a look. Without a word, Zar stepped forward, crouching down to examine the earth beneath the cracked floor. As his fingers brushed the surface, he felt a strange warmth, an unnatural energy pulsing from below. Suddenly, the ground beneath them cracked open again, but this time, it wasn't just a small fissure. The earth split wide, revealing a vast chasm below. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as a deep, low hum resonated from within the depths. "The source," Sela murmured, her voice filled with awe. "It's down there." Zar stood up, his mind racing. He had no idea what lay below, but he knew one thing for sure: the planet's hidden truth was about to be uncovered. And with it, everything they thought they knew about Earth, and their mission, would be completely rewritten. As the beast circled above them, its growl growing louder, Zar and Sela had no choice but to descend into the chasm. They were no longer just explorers, they were now part of something much larger. Something far more dangerous. Zar reached for his communicator. "We need to go down. We need to understand what this planet is hiding." Sela nodded, determination in her eyes. "And we need to make sure we don't make the same mistake the humans did. We have to uncover the truth, before it's too late." The chasm yawned before them, an abyss of darkness, and as they descended into its depths, Zar couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into the heart of Earth's greatest secret. And whatever they found there, it would change everything. The further they descended into the chasm, the more the air around them thickened. It was unlike anything Zar had ever experienced. A strange warmth seeped through the rocky walls, and the hum of the planet grew louder, vibrating in his bones. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they were stepping into the core of something ancient, something alive. Zar glanced over at Sela, whose face was set in grim determination. He could see that the tension in her posture matched his own. Neither of them knew what awaited them, but they couldn't turn back now. Whatever secrets Earth hid beneath its surface had to be unearthed. The woman, still with them, remained silent, her fear now evident in the tremor of her hands. Zar had noticed her increasing distress as they descended further into the dark cavern. He was sure she knew more than she let on, but whatever it was, she wasn't ready to speak yet. The walls of the chasm were jagged and uneven, like broken shards of glass, as though the planet itself had cracked open and formed a wound. Zar reached out and ran his fingers along the surface. It was warm to the touch, almost alive, and there was something unsettling about it, something beyond natural. "Keep moving," Sela urged, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We're getting closer." Zar nodded, his heart pounding. It was no longer just the creature above them that posed a danger, it was the mystery below. Every step felt like they were uncovering more of the planet's buried secrets, secrets that Earth's inhabitants had somehow kept hidden for millennia. The deeper they went, the more the vibrations in the air grew. It was as though the planet itself was waking up. Zar couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the heart of something ancient, something so old that even the stars themselves might not have witnessed its birth. The woman leading them faltered, her breath shallow and quick. "It's here," she whispered, as though speaking to herself. "It's really here." Zar turned to her, trying to hide the anxiety creeping up on him. "What's here? What is it?" The woman swallowed hard and glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wide with fear. "It's the core. The source of everything. The thing that keeps this world alive. The thing that keeps the beasts here." Sela's brow furrowed. "The core?" The woman nodded, her voice almost inaudible. "Yes. It's not just a power source. It's alive. It controls everything. And if you awaken it..." Her voice trailed off, and Zar didn't need her to finish the sentence. He understood the gravity of her words. If they awakened whatever was buried beneath Earth's surface, it might change the very nature of life on the planet. They might be unleashing something far more dangerous than the beasts above them. They reached a small plateau, where the path seemed to narrow, the walls closing in on them. At the end of the tunnel, a large circular door loomed, its surface etched with ancient symbols that Zar couldn't recognize. The symbols seemed to pulse with an eerie light, and the closer they got, the more the air around them seemed to hum with energy. Sela stepped forward and placed her hand on the door. She closed her eyes for a moment, and Zar could see her focusing intently, trying to decipher the ancient mechanism. After what felt like an eternity, the door slid open with a grinding noise, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The sight that greeted them was nothing short of breathtaking and terrifying. The chamber was immense, its walls lined with smooth, black stone that seemed to absorb the light. In the center of the room, a massive, glowing orb floated, suspended in the air. It emitted a soft, pulsating light, casting eerie shadows on the walls around them. The hum of the planet was louder now, resonating through the chamber, and Tsar could feel it deep in his chest, like a heartbeat. The woman gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "It's the core. It's awake." Tsar and Sela stood frozen for a moment, taking in the sight of the orb. There was something hypnotic about it, as though it was calling to them, pulling them closer. Tsar took a tentative step forward, drawn to the orb's otherworldly glow. "What is it?" Sela asked, her voice low with awe. "What does it do?" The woman shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know. It's not something you can control. It's the lifeblood of this planet. And those creatures, the beasts above, they're its protectors. They're here to ensure no one ever reaches it." Tsar's mind raced as he tried to process what the woman had just said. The core wasn't just a source of power. It was alive. It had been here for eons, feeding off the planet, and the creatures above were merely its guardians. They weren't just wild animals. They were part of a much larger system. "We need to destroy it," Sela said, her voice firm. "If we don't, everything here, everything we've fought for, will be consumed by it." Tsar hesitated, a sense of dread crawling up his spine. Destroying the core was easier said than done. This wasn't just some power source. This was something far more ancient, far more dangerous. "We don't even know what it can do," Tsar pointed out. "What if destroying it causes the entire planet to collapse?" Sela's eyes were steely, her determination unwavering. "We have no choice. If we don't stop it now, Earth's fate is sealed. The beasts won't be the last of it. They're just the beginning." Tsar looked at the woman. "You know what we have to do. Don't you?" The woman's face twisted in fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could utter a word, the chamber shook violently. The core pulsed with a furious intensity, and Tsar felt the ground beneath his feet tremble. "It's reacting to us," Sela said urgently, her voice rising above the growing noise. "We've triggered something." Tsar turned to look at the woman, whose face was now frozen in terror. "What is it doing?" he demanded. The woman's eyes widened in horror. "It's sending out a signal. A call. The beasts will be here soon. And they'll bring more with them." Before Tsar could respond, a low growl echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the walls like a thunderclap. The sound grew louder, and Tsar knew immediately that the beasts were closing in. But this time, it wasn't just one creature. They were many. And they were coming fast. "We need to get out of here, now," Tsar shouted, grabbing Sela's arm. But as he turned to run, the ground beneath them cracked open, and a massive form erupted from the depths of the chamber. The beast was unlike anything they had seen before, a colossal, shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with an intense, unnatural light. The woman screamed, but Tsar and Sela didn't have time to react. The beast's enormous claws lashed out, tearing through the air with terrifying speed. There was no escape. Not now. Not anymore. The beast's claws slashed through the air, cutting the stone around them as if it were paper. Tsar barely had time to react, pushing Sela out of the way as the creature's massive paw swiped at him. The force of the blow sent him sprawling across the cold, hard ground. Pain shot through his body as he hit the floor, but there was no time to feel it. He had to move. He had to survive. Sela was already on her feet, her face set in grim determination. "We need to stop it," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the creature. But Tsar could see the fear in her eyes. She, too, understood the enormity of what was happening. The woman, who had led them here, was frozen in place, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at the creature that now stood between them and the only exit from the chamber. Tsar knew that they couldn't outrun it, not with the ground shaking beneath their feet and the walls beginning to crack under the creature's sheer size. The orb in the center of the chamber pulsed with an ominous light, as if reacting to the creature's presence. The beast growled again, its massive form shifting and rippling with unnatural speed. Zar's heart raced. This wasn't just a beast. It was a guardian, a sentient being linked to the very core of the planet. And now, it was awake. "We can't fight it," Zar said, trying to stand. His muscles screamed in protest, but he pushed through. "We need to disable the core. Now." Sela nodded, understanding what he meant. They couldn't destroy the creature, it was too powerful. But if they could destroy the core, they might be able to stop the creatures that guarded it. The woman looked from Zar to Sela, her expression one of helplessness. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "The core is everything. If you destroy it, you destroy the balance of this world. The creatures won't be the only thing to die. The planet itself will unravel." Zar shook his head. "It's too late for that. The balance has already been broken. The planet is already dying, and if we don't do something, we'll all be swallowed by it." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You don't know what you're dealing with. You can't just turn it off. The core, it will fight back. And when it does, you'll wish you had never come here." Zar's mind raced. He knew the woman was right. The core wasn't just a power source, it was a living, breathing entity. But there was no choice now. The creatures would never stop. If the core wasn't destroyed, there would be no escaping them. No escaping the fate Earth had already sealed for itself. As the beast drew closer, Zar and Sela made a split-second decision. They had to make it to the core. They had to end it all. Together, they sprinted toward the glowing orb, ignoring the beast's deafening growls and the air thick with the pulse of the planet's hum. The woman followed them, though it was clear she didn't want to. Her legs were trembling, and her gaze was fixed on the floor as if trying to avoid seeing the creature that had once been her protector. Zar reached the core first, his hand trembling as he reached out toward the pulsing light. He could feel the energy emanating from it, vibrating against his skin like a low hum, a frequency that resonated deep within him. It was almost inviting. Like it wanted him to touch it. But he pulled his hand back, knowing that touching it would mean certain death. Instead, he turned to Sela. "We need to find the source. The key to shutting it down." Sela nodded and scanned the chamber. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols they had seen earlier, but now they seemed to glow with an inner fire, as though alive. She moved quickly, examining each symbol, each groove in the wall, but it wasn't until her fingers brushed against a series of carvings on the left side that something clicked. A low hum filled the room, and the symbols began to shift, revealing a hidden compartment. "I found it!" Sela called out, her voice laced with both relief and fear. "The key!" Zar rushed to her side, barely avoiding the beast's snapping jaws as it lunged toward them. He felt the heat of its breath on his skin but kept his focus on the glowing symbols before them. The compartment opened with a soft hiss, revealing a strange device, a small, metallic orb that seemed to pulse with the same energy as the core. Sela held it in her hand, her fingers gripping the device with a mixture of awe and terror. "This is it, Zar. This is the key to shutting it down." Zar reached out, taking the device from her hands. His heart pounded as he turned it over, examining it closely. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Ancient and alien, yet strangely familiar. "Where do we place it?" Zar asked, his voice tight. Sela glanced at the core, then back at the device. "I think it goes inside the core. We have to merge the two." The woman gasped. "You can't. It will destroy everything." But there was no time to argue. Zar looked at Sela, then at the woman. "We don't have a choice. With trembling hands, he stepped toward the glowing orb, feeling the oppressive weight of the planet's energy bearing down on him. The beast was getting closer, but Zar didn't falter. He knew what he had to do. He pressed the device into the center of the core, and for a moment, nothing happened. The room fell silent, and the only sound was the distant growl of the creature that was closing in on them. Then, the ground beneath them began to shake violently. The woman screamed. "You've done it. You've triggered it." Zar didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. The core was reacting, its pulsing light growing brighter and brighter, until it was almost blinding. The vibrations in the air were unbearable, and Zar could feel his skin tingling with the energy coursing through the room. And then, in a flash of light, everything stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. The air grew still, the hum of the planet fading into nothingness. The beast had vanished, its growls silenced. The core, too, had gone dark, its once blinding light dimming to a faint glow. Zar stood frozen, his hand still outstretched toward the now dormant core. He couldn't believe what had just happened. They had done it. They had shut it down. But at what cost? The woman, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, was the first to speak. "It's over," she said softly, her voice filled with disbelief. "You've destroyed it." Zar turned to face her, his heart heavy with the weight of their actions. "We had no choice," he said quietly. "If we hadn't, the creatures would have destroyed everything. Earth's future would have been sealed." The woman looked down at her feet. Tears streaming down her face. "And now what?" Zar didn't know how to answer. The world around them had changed. The core was no longer active, but that didn't mean Earth was safe. The creatures were gone, but the damage had been done. The planet itself was dying. Sela stepped forward, placing a hand on Zar's shoulder. "We did what we had to do. We saved Earth." Zar nodded, though the weight of the woman's words lingered in his mind. They had destroyed the heart of the planet. And yet, despite their victory, he felt no joy. "Now we rebuild," he said softly. "We rebuild, and we learn from this." And with that, they turned away from the darkened core, leaving behind the ruins of a world that had once been.